So, what I'm saying is that I've given up on finding the truth. In fact, I'm not even sure a singular truth exists. See, around 4 years ago, I began to feel this general sense of unease at how I lacked a core set of beliefs and values, something which almost everyone around me and on the internet seemed to have. I had lived the first 17 years of my life in India and spent the next 5 years in the United States completing my undergraduate and graduate studies. And the highly vocal, individualistic culture of the American college environment presented a stark contrast to my relatively undifferentiated ego, which had comfortably rested so far in the womb of the collective back in India. So it was only towards the end of my stint in the States that I developed knowledge enough to occupy moral positions on issues of social interest, and also developed a desire to find my unique voice, if there was one. So I did. I was a person of color who was in a struggle against the whites to find my unique voice. An Indian who faced microaggressions in my interactions with ignorant white people, and a member of a minority group who had to resist the white majority's attempt to pigeonhole me for their own convenience. I was a feminist who would stand firmly alongside women in their fight against the patriarchy. I was a liberal who supported equal rights for members of the LGBTQ community. I was a globalist, ever welcoming, ever inclusive. And equipped with these wonderfully progressive ideas, I went back to India, certain that I would change the regressive thinking of those around me. But there was just a tiny hitch. I was going back to India. There's no white majority in India. Instead, there's a Hindu majority, which I am a part of. A Hindu majority which is guilty of its own pernicious attitudes towards the Muslim minority. I'm a Hindu Brahmin, a group which sits atop a dangerously constructed caste system, and I have engaged with the oppressed castes and classes with my own quiver of microaggressions. I'm a Hindu Brahmin male, part of the patriarchy, which has used religion and tradition to subjugate women. I'm a straight Hindu Brahmin male, who for the first 17 years of my life thought that a gay person existed simply as a source of comic relief. So, almost instantly, I was the majority. I was the one in the position of power. I was the one whom the minority was in its fight against. The only reason I hadn't noticed this before was because my ego truly started becoming conscious of itself only once I started living in the United States. And the reality of American society became my own. Now, back in India, I rapidly became aware of another reality. A reality where I wasn't a victim. It was this realization that dismantled the personality I had crafted so carefully in response to the social atmosphere of America. What was I supposed to be? Was I the victim or the oppressor? For some time, I tried desperately to cling to the mentality of the former. It was comforting. It absolved me of my guilt. But most of all, it gave me someone to blame for the ambiguous crime of oppression. But this simply wasn't viable in the long term. Especially because I started acknowledging how I sometimes would occupy moral positions which were contradictory to the ones I believed to be right. Like, I got annoyed when I saw someone on my Facebook newsfeed ask for donations to a relief fund for Syrian families. I sometimes thought of Trump's Muslim ban as a sensible proposal. I occasionally laughed at blatantly sexist jokes. I would look at photographs of a pride parade and wish the LGBTQ community could just stop being so damn proud of itself. I would then chastise myself for not being compassionate enough, for thinking bigoted thoughts, and I'd feel bad for not being a feminist or a good liberal. I would tell myself that these thoughts and feelings were an aberration, a momentary lapse in conscience. Except that these momentary lapses in conscience weren't entirely infrequent. The system of beliefs and values which I had held for just a short while in the States crumbled almost immediately after spending just a few months in India. I felt guilty, I felt chaotic, I felt filthy, I felt inauthentic. I felt uncertain. I needed to feel certain about the society I lived in, just the way I had felt a few months ago. I needed the truth. And so I turned to philosophy, quite enthusiastically. Aristotle, Montaigne, Hegel, Sartre, Camus, de Beauvoir, Kierkegaard, Hume, Kant, Nietzsche, Freud, Jung, Rand, Foucault, Arendt, Vivekanand, Osho, Sadhguru, Krishnamurti, Vedanta, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Tao Te Ching. Nothing. No truth. Rather, multiple truths. From some of the grandest theories on human life and its evolution, all I gleaned was that every brilliant philosophy could only speak for the subjective experiences of its proponents. Which is why there are so many philosophies, which is why no one has ever proposed an irrefutable truth. But more importantly, what struck me was the uncertainty, glaringly evident in the thought of these thinkers and revered texts. They were often contradictory, and often morally ambiguous. Some of them, of course, reveled in their ambiguity, while the others tried to cover it up with endless jargon. But this was probably truth enough for me. Uncertainty, ambiguity. No one knows what the fuck is happening. No one's good, no one's bad. Everyone is just confused. Unable to be completely virtuous, unable to be completely evil. In fact, simply unsure of what is virtue and what is evil. Everyone is simply drowning in the vast oceans of information, unable to take everything into consideration, and hence putting forth theory after theory, letting loose arrow after arrow, at once in the dark and in the light, at once right and wrong, at once hitting their mark, and yet missing completely. Maybe the uncertainty of everything is the grand truth of life. So, am I victim or oppressor? Both. Each of us is like the Uroboros, the serpent that eats its own tail, that from which everything originates, that into which everything dissolves. So it is only fitting that each of us is a source in itself of all the emotions, feelings, personalities, potentialities, and actions that have characterized human existence. Each of us contains within us the beauty and the ugliness, the virtue and the vice, the feminist and the misogynist, the globalist and the anxious exclusionist, the powerful and the powerless, the meaningful and the meaningless. And once we truly give equal value to these contradictory postulates, what results is a formless, aimless uncertainty. Detached, and yet not indifferent. This might seem quite dreadful, but I see it as liberating. Freed from the opposites, freed from the rage, freed from the desire for certainty, we accept the whole within us.